I have the Nikon Z9, the Canon R5, and the Sony Alpha 1, and I want to find out which one is the best for wildlife photography. I like making these videos because they're not a rushed pre-production camera review. We've taken over 70,000 pictures each with the R5 and the Alpha 1, and 35,000 pictures with the Nikon Z9. As a reminder, we've never accepted a sponsorship from any camera manufacturer. I've been putting them through a series of tests. I did an entire video on landscape and travel, then I did a video on portrait photography, and now my final test is to test wildlife. I'm gonna put a 600mm f4 on each of these cameras, and I'm gonna be testing things like the autofocus, the usability, buffering, and a whole bunch more things. But first I want to take a moment to thank my sponsor, KEH. If you're thinking about buying a new camera or selling your old one, consider using KEH. They have a huge amount of inventory, great prices, and they have a 180-day warranty. So if for any reason you buy something and it's not working, they make it right. They also have a return period where if you're not happy with it, you can send it back. They test everything and grade it so you know that you're getting quality, well-functioning camera gear. And they offer a 5% off coupon with our coupon code in the description down below, and a 5% bonus if you decide to sell your gear through them. Use the coupon code down below. Thanks, KEH. I'm also going to be offering some budget options because I know not everyone can afford this top-end gear. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about is the pricing, the availability, and the handling. I'll start with the Nikon Z9. This is the mid-range of the three. It's $5,500, but it's not available everywhere. It's either back ordered. Some people are price gouging because the availability is spotty. The hand holding is good if you're in a Nikon system already and you're looking to go from Nikon to Nikon. I think this is the best mirrorless Nikon made. It feels like a Nikon. The buttons are in similar places and they feel good. I think that you'll be happy as a Nikon shooter with this setup. It is the largest of the three cameras. It's 46 ounces. The other two cameras are 26 ounces. And that's because it has this built-in battery that's larger. If you really care about the extra battery capacity, then this is a good option for you if you do not want to carry extra batteries. If you'd like the system to be able to become more compact by taking off a battery grip, that's not an option. It's fixed to the camera. Here I have it on a tripod, which I prefer sometimes. If you get the right tripod, you can get some nice panning shots. But I have a hard time hand holding this because the body, like I said, is 46 ounces, but the Nikon 600mm lens is also heavier than the other two 600mm lenses by about 1.5 pounds. So in total, this setup compared to the other two systems is about 3 pounds heavier. If you're hand holding or if you're hiking with it, that could be a big weight difference. So Nikon is supposed to have this amazing 800mm f6.3 lens coming out. It's supposed to be lighter, it's supposed to be more compact. I'll be trying that out in a future video, but for this video, I wanted every camera to have the same focal length, so that's 600mm f4. The Canon R5 is the least expensive of the three at $3,900 for the body, and you get a lot. It's a good value in my opinion. And ergonomically, I think it feels great. It's easy to handle. I love the menu system. I think it's very intuitive. I haven't had a big problem finding things. It's the type of camera I like for my everyday shooter where I don't think about the camera when I'm taking pictures. I think about taking pictures. If you're a Canon shooter and you're currently in a DSLR and you're thinking about switching to mirrorless, you're going to love the R5. It has all of the feel and all of the benefits of a DSLR with the added benefits of a mirrorless camera. And it no longer has all those issues I've had with previous mirrorless cameras with things like blackout when you're taking pictures through the EVF or lag. The Sony Alpha 1 is the most expensive of the three at $6,500, but before you write it off for that reason, you actually get a lot of bang for your buck. It's the only one that does 30 frames per second raw. The hand holdability is also very good. I love the way it feels in the hand. Now that I'm feeling it right after the Canon, it actually feels a little bit smaller in the hand than the Canon, but all the buttons feel good. The button placement is great, and best of all, it's available anywhere you want to buy it. And because they've been doing mirrorless for a long time, they also have a great lens selection. I want to talk about something that I like the most about the Sony, and that's the electronic viewfinder, because in my opinion, It's not my opinion, it's fact. It has the highest resolution, it's the sharpest. Part of the pleasure I get from taking wildlife photos is watching the animals and seeing them at 600 millimeters and seeing them up close and being able to watch them and see the beauty of nature. And the early mirrorless cameras they looked like an old TV or something. The quality was low and it took me out of the moment. Let's talk about frames per second. Everybody talks about it. Why does it matter? Well, in wildlife, if you have more frames per second, that means you're capturing more action. And for me, that can mean the moment between getting the bird hitting the water and pulling out the fish, or missing that moment and instead getting when they're underwater or when their butt's to and they're flying away. So I like to have a high frame rate to make sure I get that special moment. Let's talk about which each camera has, because it's not that straightforward. There's some caveats. We have the Nikon Z9 here. It gets 20 frames per second RAW, amazing. 30 frames per second JPEG only. That might be a deal breaker for me because I shoot a lot of animals with a lot of contrast. So an osprey, a bird that I like to shoot, has dark feathers, a white head, and is often against a white sky. Will JPEGs be able to recover that detail? In my opinion, JPEG is fine for pictures that require only light editing. But watch me edit this high contrast, underexposed eagle photo in both JPEG and RAW simultaneously. The RAW file did a better job of restoring the blues because it has more color information. The RAW file also has far more shadow information. This photo required fairly extreme editing that you won't need for most photos, but the higher quality of RAW is great to have when you need it. If JPEG's good enough for you, the Canon R5 gives you 20 frames per second, while the Sony Alpha 1 and the Nikon Z9 give you 30 frames per second. If you want the quality of RAW for heavy editing, the R5 and Z9 gives you 20 frames per second. Only the Alpha 1 gives you the full 30 frames per second, albeit with somewhat lesser 12-bit files. It's all amazing. 20 frames per second is amazing. 30 frames per second on the Sony Alpha 1 is incredible. It's not something you're going to leave on all the time, or else you're going to end up with more pictures than you can possibly handle. So I would recommend using that selectively, because I've had to look through a lot of pictures. I've had regrets, privileged regrets. The Z9 is the only one with this really cool feature called pre-release capture. And it works kind of like your phone. You know how you scrub through your live view on your pictures and it's capturing moments you didn't realize you had? The Z9 can capture photos 30 frames, 1 second before you press the shutter. So if you're a little bit late getting the action, you'll still have it captured, but it will only be in JPEG. If you've ever taken pictures of a bird hunting fish, sometimes you're taking pictures and they dive and they come up with nothing, and then you have a series of 20 shots, 30 shots of nothing. You don't want to keep it. With this, you can wait until you see the bird has a fish and then press the shutter, and you know that you're going to get 30 frames before. So you might be even working on your workflow a little bit, saving some time. Here's an example. When the sparrow showed up, I pressed the shutter as quick as I could, but the moment would have been lost in my quarter-second human reaction time. With the Z9's pre-release capture, I can rewind to before I push the shutter and find the perfect frame. Brilliant. Brilliant, Nikon. I applaud that, and I hope to see that go into the other two cameras soon. One thing that has bothered me is something about the Canon R5, and that's one of the reasons I'm considering switching for wildlife. But before I want to get into that, I want to talk about our sponsor, KEH, because I understand not everyone can get a $6,500 camera or a $5,500 camera, but thanks to KEH, you can get used gear at affordable prices, and it can be excellent. In fact, for wildlife, I recommend a lot of older DSLRs. You don't have to have the latest, greatest camera with the highest frame rates to get amazing pictures. I promise you. I love the D500, I love the D850, and there's plenty of other cameras, and KEH has them in stock. Not only that, I have a huge lot of lenses that I recommend. I made an entire video about it, and they're lenses that are anywhere from $800 and up. So there's something for almost any wildlife photographer's budget. If you want to get a great deal on wildlife gear or any camera, go to KEH, where they have a huge inventory of cameras and lenses and accessories. They test them all and inspect them so you can see the grade of the gear there, and they even have a return policy and a guarantee for 180 days. Thanks KEH for making this video possible. If you want to save 5%, use our coupon code that's down in the description. If you want to sell your gear to KEH and get a 5% bonus, they have a coupon code for that down in the description too. All right, let's get into this next thing I was talking about with the Canon R5 that I have a problem with, and that's rolling shutter. If you don't know what rolling shutter is, I'll explain the impact that it has. If you're doing a panning shot in either wildlife or sports and you need to take pictures and move the camera from side to side rather quickly, you'll see that your subject or things in the background will bend. So you can see in this picture of a hummingbird that I took, the wings are actually bent in a strange shape. And other pictures where I've been panning, the bird looks fine, but the background is straight reeds and they're all leaning, or there's a bridge and the pillars are leaning. Here's a simulation of the rolling shutter you get with the R5 silent electronic shutter. Picture ruined. Here's a simulation of what the electronic shutter on the Z9 and Alpha 1 would produce. Much better. All of these have like a full range of autofocus points all over the sensor, so you don't have to worry about that. They all have eye autofocus for animals. I've tested it in all of them, and some work better than others. Tony and I spent several hours with heavy field monitors recording the viewfinders on each camera so we could demonstrate this to you. This is especially difficult with the Sony and Canon because they shut off the viewfinder, so you're left viewing the HDMI field monitor, which adds lag and it's difficult to find stuff. It's a challenge. All the cameras did great with mostly still subjects. They locked onto the eye of the birds and the mammals, though the Alpha 1 requires that you change a setting for the different subject types. So if you're shooting birds, they'll have a bird one. There's mammals, there's people. If you're shooting with a DSLR, this is absolutely an amazing upgrade because you don't have to pinpoint the AF point on the animal's eye anymore. It generally finds that area or the eye, and it's just incredible and it's easy. It's a wonderful feature. I love it. With the Z9, autofocus was the best wide open. I found the Z9's autofocus got significantly worse when I used a higher f-stop such as f8, which I need when I'm working at high magnification with smaller birds. The Alpha 1 and R5 autofocus continued to work fine at higher f-stops. Where we saw big differences was in flying birds. All of the cameras succeeded sometimes, and all of the cameras failed sometimes. Nothing's perfect, and that's okay, guys. That just means there's more to learn and there's room for improvement, so let's not kill the messenger. But the Z9 with firmware 2.0 failed to track flying birds more often than either the Canon or the Sony. The Nikon often failed to find a bird in the frame, even when I used 3D tracking and put the AF point right on the bird. Watch as this goal seems to disappear. The Z9's focusing hunted until the bird was lost in the depth of field, and no one ever saw that bird again. And that bird had a family. In similar situations, the Alpha 1 immediately locked onto the animal, even when I missed it with my focusing point. The Alpha 1 then tracked it relentlessly and consistently until it did not, because sometimes that failed too, just less often. When I got the Z9 to lock onto a flying bird, it usually lost track. It lost track a lot. Here's a heartbreaking collection of clips of the Z9 losing track and jumping to the background. Imagine the frustration of waiting weeks, months, covered in mud, battling mosquitoes to find an eagle flying with prey, only to have the subject tracking lock onto the background instead and forever lose it in the depth of field. The dark depths of field. How did the Canon R5 do? We've reviewed the Animal IAF and the R5 previously, and it hasn't changed. It works very well, almost as well as the Alpha 1. They're almost tied. They both work very, very well. Overall, they're both better than the Z9, which is remarkable since it's $1,600 less than the Z9 and $2,600 less expensive than the Alpha 1. The Canon R5 is a bargain. The IAF tracking works really well. What am I going to say? It's a good deal. The Z9 has 2 CF Express B cards. That's an advantage over the Alpha 1 and the R5 because you can write RAW to both cards. So there's an advantage. It also should be faster. Let's see how many shots I can get before the buffer fills up, because what's the point of these fast cards and that high frames per second if you just start buffering?
Duck. And you can hear it slows down.
The R5 had the worst buffering. Shooting RAW only to the fast CF card, it maintained full speed for only 2 seconds and then became very erratic, shooting anywhere from 0 to a full 20 frames per second. In a long action sequence, this would be very frustrating. The Z9 shot 20 frames per second RAW for about 3 seconds, then dropped to a consistent 13 frames per second, which it could shoot forever. The winner was the Alpha 1, which shot 30 frames per second RAW for a solid 5 seconds, then dropped to a consistent 16 frames per second. The Sony has 2 CF Express Type A cards, and you can write RAW to both cards. but there aren't as many gigabytes on these cards as we typically use. Each card has 160 gigabytes, but we typically like to use more, so keep that in mind if you like larger cards. The Sony Alpha 1 doesn't have those available yet. The R5 has two different cards. It has a fast CF Express Type B card, but then it also has an SD card, which you write JPEGs to, and it isn't as fast, so. The truth is, you could choose any of these three cameras and you would be thrilled. They're all fantastic. They're all good cameras. But the Sony Alpha 1, that's the wildlife camera for me and the winner of this challenge because it has the best autofocus. It has 30 frames per second, raw, and I just like it. I like using it. Look, the pictures look great. It's fun for me. You have to stay tuned because this has won the wildlife challenge, which is heavily weighted, but it didn't win the landscape and travel. And it was a tie for the portrait, so I still have to choose if I'm gonna switch cameras this time. Will I stay with the R5? Will I go with the Z9? Will I choose the Alpha 1? That's gonna be my next video, if you care about that. Ugh. Thank you, KEH, for sponsoring this video. If you wanna sell your old gear and get a new wildlife camera, if you want the wildlife camera of your dreams, you can get it at KEH, and you can get a great deal with our coupon codes. They're down in the description down below. You can get 5% off or a 5% bonus if you decide to sell. So go to KEH, and thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video because I'm gonna combine what I learned in all of my testing, portraits, landscapes, travel, wildlife, and choose the camera that I want. Thanks.